Hey guys, welcome to my presentation. My name is Stephanie Moeller and I am a first grade teacher at Irving Elementary in Waterloo, Iowa. I'm also a graduate student at Morningside. My research project study was focusing on the effects of graphic organizers on reading comprehension in first grade students. According to the National Assessment for Educational Progress, 36% of fourth grade and 34% of eighth grade students performed at or above the proficient level in 2013. As you can see in this figure here, this green line is fourth grade and the orange line is eighth grade, and then the yellow is 12th grade. And as you can see over the course of throughout these years, the scores have virtually remained the same, which is great that they haven't declined, but it's also not a positive note that they haven't been gradually increasing. How this connects to the classroom is data results like the NAEP scores impact how teachers approach their planning and approach their instruction and how they want to increase reading scores. Being a first grade teacher myself, I try to implement the best practices to increase students' comprehension and also increase students' reading levels. My research study also aligns with statewide and within my school district expectations as well. So why did I choose graphic organizers? Graphic organizers offer a way for students to organize the information and organize in their head and help them summarize and remember the text they are reading. It also helps students become independent learners in the classroom. And then graphic organizers also help you address different learning styles, and mostly being the visual learners. And while there's a lot of research out there investigating comprehension and the use of graphic organizers, I found the gap in research lies within the type of organizer being used. That is why I chose the beginning, middle, and end graphic organizers to help students summarize and sequence the events that happen in the story in order. The purpose of this study was to determine the effects of instruction using graphic organizers to improve reading comprehension in first grade students who are reading below grade level, with the independent variable being graphic organizers and the dependent variable being the reading level. I hypothesize that students who are reading below grade level will increase their reading level after being exposed to explicit instruction regarding the use of beginning, middle, and end graphic organizers. Participants that I had in my study, I had 9 first grade students, 3 boys and 6 girls. These students were chosen because they were all reading below grade level at the beginning of this past school year. Their ethnic backgrounds included Caucasian, Hispanic, and African American, and one student who was in that group was receiving IEP services in reading. Materials that we used included the DRA2 test, the developmental reading assessment, that's what we use for the baseline as well as the post-test. Students used the graphic organizers. They also used the writing utensils, whatever they chose to fill out the graphic organizers with. And I also used the JASP program to help analyze the data. My research study was 10 weeks long. I used a single subject to group pre-test, post-test design. Students received small group instruction every day for 15 minutes. Graphic organizers that focused on beginning, middle, and end were introduced and modeled for students who were in the experimental group. Students in the control group did not receive instruction with the graphic organizers. DRA2 scores were collected at the beginning of the study and used as the baseline data, and also the same assessment was used at the end of the 10 weeks for the post-test, and that was used to determine the effectiveness of the graphic organizers. As you can see by looking at the table, the p-value was larger than the 5%, so the null hypothesis is not rejected. However, if you look a little bit more closely with the experimental and the control group, the experimental group who received the treatment, the intervention, resulted in higher post-test scores than the students that were in the control group. And even though both groups made growth during this time, there was not a significant difference in baseline and post-test scores. Looking a little bit more closely at individual student scores, if you look at the bottom here, the numbers represent individual students. The orange color here represents the baseline scores, and the lighter orange color represents the post-test scores. So you can see the amount of growth that each individual student had made. After reflecting on my research study, I found that there were some limitations or things that I would do differently next time. The sample size that I had was extremely small. I only had 9 students to start because they were below grade level in reading, and since I had a control and experimental group, those 9 students were randomly divided into 2, and then it left me with a really small group of students participating in the experimental group. Also in first grade, students were receiving title reading services as well as reading recovery services. Since my participants were already below grade level in reading, the majority of them received either one or the other title or reading recovery services, except for the one student who was already getting services through his IEP. And for those of you who don't know, reading recovery is a one-on-one reading program with a reading specialist, and they go with that teacher daily one-on-one every day for 30 minutes. And so participants in my study were either receiving title services or reading recovery services alongside my intervention throughout the course of the research study. I would say another limitation to my study was the duration. I don't feel that the time span that I allowed was large enough to see significant growth throughout this study. The first week was dedicated to collecting those baseline scores. The 10th week was also dedicated to collecting the post-data scores. So really the intervention, there was only 8 weeks of time in there for the actual explicit instruction. And lastly, I only used 1 unit of measure, the DRA2 assessment, at the beginning and the end of the research study. For future, I would suggest maybe using another form of assessment to progress monitor in between the beginning and end of the research study. Even though the results weren't what I was expecting to see, I still think teachers should be encouraged to use graphic organizers as a strategy to help students in the classroom on comprehension and their reading levels. The use of graphic organizers helps students organize information, activate background knowledge, and make connections between what they already know and new information that they're collecting. Graphic organizers, I think, are used best during small group instruction, but can also allow for really deep conversation if used in large group. And graphic organizers also address students who learn with different learning styles, and in particular, the visual learners. For future research, I would suggest using an entire first grade class as participants, or maybe even using more than one section of a first grade class. I would also suggest using all students from the classroom, students who are below grade level, students who are on grade level, students who are above grade level. I would use all of those students, including students using IEP services, or including students who receive the title and the reading recovery. I would include all of those students as participants. I would also suggest using the longer duration of study, like I mentioned before, and utilizing more than one unit of measure to help progress monitor from the beginning to the end of the study. So in conclusion, it was found that students can increase reading levels after being exposed to explicit instruction with graphic organizers. However, this research study, there was not enough sufficient data to support my hypothesis. I would suggest future research is needed to conclude that graphic organizers is a successful intervention for first grade students. And here is a peek at the references that I used for this presentation. Feel free to leave any comments or let me know if you have any questions.